Hello, everyone. My name is Janelle Kirchhoff, and I'm on the ECIS Library and Information Services Committee. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today is our last episode before the summer holiday of our webinar series, Lessons from the Library. Today's webinar is the ISL Research Institute, using language stories as the foundation of student expertise. Today's webinar session will be recorded and available online for your viewing pleasure within the next few days. We will share that out to you when it is possible and available. We also will post it to the links on our webpage and on our Facebook and LinkedIn groups. If you haven't joined us on Facebook or LinkedIn, please do that. The links are posted in the chat as we speak. Now, during the webinar, cameras can be on or off, but please mute your video, or please mute your audio, and just be aware that it is being recorded. We encourage questions from the audience, and time will be allotted at the end of our presentation for any questions and answers. Any questions you have during the session can be put in the chat. I will moderate them throughout the presentation and share them with the presenter during the question and answer portion. And now, without any further ado, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our speaker, Claire Brumpton. Claire is the head of Research Center at the International School of London. At ISL, she is responsible for 3 libraries from pre-K to grade 12 and leads the ISL Research Institute for the MYP students. She has worked in various library settings for over 20 years. She has experience in the national curriculum, IPC, and the IBDP. And she has also co-written a series of articles for the Head Teacher Update and SecEd. With all of this experience, she also acts as a mentor for the new librarians at the School Library Association. Welcome, Claire, and thank you for speaking to us today.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here this afternoon. I'm actually going to be presenting this afternoon with 4 of my students who will be running the second part of the presentation. So the first part will be me explaining a little bit about the Research Institute as a project and what it is. And the second part of the presentation will be students talking about the project that they took part in last year. So this is an outline of what we're going to be talking about this afternoon. So first of all, what is the Research Institute? We look at the benefits of being involved in a project like this. We look at how we can use students' language stories as the foundation for a project. We look at the process, and I will talk a little bit about some of the previous projects that we've been involved in before our students take the stage for the second half. So I do also want to make you aware that this Padlet is going to be made available to you at the end of the presentation. There will be a QR code and a link that will be in the slides, and the slides will be shared with everybody afterwards. So you'll all get access to this. So everything that is being used today, you will get access to later. So no need to make any notes or screenshots or anything. So first of all, I want to start with talking about what the Research Institute is. Now, it started as a conversation between myself and the head of school and a couple of other colleagues about, can middle school students really conduct proper academic research? Distinguishing it from the usual school level sort of research in terms of, go and find something out, sort of, we're talking about collecting data and rather than looking at questions to which the answer already exists, and also looking at research which is based in the student's expertise. We're looking at collection of original data that work that has a level of academic rigor not usually expected in a school research project. And in general, we look at working with 12 to 15-year-old students. That's sort of the average age groups that we work with. Also, an academic mentor is an essential part of this process. So these are the things on the screen here that we identified as being particularly important to allow this project to take place. And I'll talk a little bit more about these in the subsequent slides. Some of the benefits, obviously in terms of university admissions, this project is great for students who are looking for experiences to stand out from others in applications. It's great for universities who are looking for students who have taken advantage of experiences like this. And it also suits the highly mobile nature of many international schools. Students can take part regardless of when they join a school, and it can work for students it works for students that are traditionally harder to support because it builds on their their existing experience rather than subject knowledge. It's also a highly marketable project. This is something that I wanted to introduce to you. So the academic mentor that has worked with us from, he's now based at the University of Bristol, and he's worked with us for a number of years. We identified that this model of facets of mastersness is, it's a conceptualization of the skills required to do a master's degree. And what we realized is that while the students that we work with are not studying at master's degree level, they are hitting each of these facets within the work that they do, so that these facets can actually be scaled down to school level. And it proves that younger students are very much capable of using this same set of skills, especially when they're working collaboratively and when they're supporting each other. So the reference is there, and the link is in the Padlet that you'll receive later if you want to find out more about this. It was really important to us to ground our work in existing good practice with children, and my colleague and fellow research facilitator came across the Children's Research Centre in our early research when we were building up this project. The Children's Research Centre is part of the Open University, and they've done some amazing work, mainly with primary school students, actually. So we took a lot of the work that they had done, and we built it up to secondary school suitability level, including things like building in scaffolded academic literature and incorporated that into the process. In the meantime, we have built up a relationship with the Children's Research Centre. They visited us at school, and I've also presented with a video of some students during lockdown at an online seminar called Growing Children's Voices in 2021. So these are some of the key texts that I would recommend to anybody who's interested in taking part in this sort of work, because it's a really good foundation for any student-led work. Now I want to introduce the concept of language stories. So this book here that one of my students, William, will talk about later, called Bilingualism in International Schools. We were aware of this book already, and we realized while we were working with our first group of students that there were little vignettes within the book of students of different ages and from different countries. So there'll be the whole book is interspersed with a grade 10 Hungarian student and a grade 8 Japanese student, and it contains lots of information about their lives, about the countries that they've lived in and the languages that they speak, and maybe the challenges that they've encountered, things like moving midway through a school year, or leaving friends behind, or having to make new friends, how to settle into a new school environment, having suddenly moving to a country where your language isn't commonly used, all of these sorts of issues that many of our students deal with on a day-to-day basis. And we realized that that was a really good starting point for our students to explore their own language stories. And later on in the presentation, you will hear our students' own language stories as the foundation for the piece of work that they did. You can see on the screen here, we've got a timeline of a student from when she was born to present time, countries she's lived in, languages she's spoken at different ages. You can also see a thematic analysis of the work of their language stories that we conducted as a group, where they could look at the similarities and differences between their own experiences and other people's, and that many of the experiences that they have are common experiences, even if the details are different. So many of our students might have lived in 3 or 4 different countries. The countries themselves will be different, but the fact that they've all lived in several countries is common to all of them. On that note, I just want to share with you a couple of graphs. So this is from projects 1 to 4. We're just coming to the end of project 5 now. So from projects 1 to 4, we've had 44 students take part so far. And within that, we had 29 languages spoken. And here's a breakdown of the languages spoken by the students who took part in the project. So you can see there's a massive range. And that just highlights why languages are a really good foundation for this sort of work. And here, again, we've got another graph where the number of languages spoken are broken down by project. So in the blue column, we have the number of students, and in the orange column, we've got the number of languages spoken. So again, you can see the range in every case. Now, some of this will be a little bit difficult to see on the screen, but obviously when you receive the slides, you'll be able to see this a little bit more clearly. This is sort of the way that we work with students about developing a research question. So we start with, what makes a good research question, and we make sure that the students have an understanding of that. Then we bring in our academic mentor and sort of make sure he brings a level of academic rigor to the discussion, allowing us to facilitate the process as well as we can. And we work alongside the students to shape their research question. It's very important to note at this stage that this is all based on the combination of language stories that our students have written and the combination of experiences that they have shared within those language stories. That's always the starting point. So they're already expert in their own experience. And that means that we don't have to front load the whole process with a lot of information and content before we can start. And these are just some of the exercises that we do with the students. So on the bottom right, you can see a funneling worksheet. So, once we reach a point where they've got a topic, what aspects of this topic particularly interest me? What exactly am I trying to find out? What are the different ways that I could go about collecting data that could help me answer this research question? Then on the top right, we have, this was a big whiteboard conversation about, as we were narrowing down topics to figure out which elements of the topic we were more interested in and less interested in. And then on the top left, you can see here where it says topics, where we're talking about switching and mixing languages and changing countries and losing mother tongue and looking at concepts like language attrition and metalinguistic awareness. So we start bringing in the academic language as the topics present themselves within the process. We don't start by saying this is the terminology you need to be using. We start again from the student's experience every time. Then moving on to some of the other work that we do, so developing a study design, preparing for data collection, working on a survey. Again, I appreciate this screen is quite difficult for you to see as part of the presentation, but you can look at it on the slides later. Again, on the bottom left here, we've got our, the school language policy. So that was something that we looked into during one of the projects. That was actually one of the pieces of literature that we used. So as well as using academic literature, we also use literature that is available to us, things like policy documents from the school, anything that makes it real to the students, and in some cases just teach the students that things like a language policy exists, because they might not know under any other circumstances. And in the middle, the big poster saying, "Are we socialized into multilingualism?" This is one of the pieces of work that our academic mentor did with us, and this was the starting point of our research question, and all of the conversations that we had during that session with the academic mentor are all on that one sheet of paper. So you can see how the conversation develops, and everything again is based on the students' responses to the questions that are posed to them. Then we move on to data analysis, and we've got a student here presenting their initial findings back to the group. So presenting findings and preparing to present is part of the work that we do with students, because obviously it's really important that students understand that part of the research process is reporting your findings and disseminating your findings to the outside world, so that it can be scrutinized. So presentations of this informal nature during the sessions go on right the way through the process. And we've got sort of discussions of what our findings are, a bit of statistical work going on, and also we've got a plan of a written report that we were going to write. So this was the first project that our students took part in. Do the languages that multilingual students in an international school are exposed to affect the languages that they think in? The study design in this case was a survey with some follow-up interviews. This was very much the pilot for the whole process, but it was, even in its pilot form, it was very successful. Project 2 was how does summer holiday affect fluency in L2 English and to what extent? So for those who aren't familiar, L2 is sort of second language English. And in this particular case, our students wanted to look at fluency levels over the summer, so before the summer started and at the end of the summer when students arrived back at school. And to do that, they decided, given the range of possible data collection, study design options that we gave them, they decided they wanted to do a film retelling task. So they took a short film that they chose themselves. It was actually a short Pixar film with no words. And they played it to the students, to the participants. They asked the students to watch it and then to retell what they'd just seen. That was audio recorded, and they repeated the exercise at the end of the summer in the first week that the students were back in school. And they wanted to see whether the level of fluency was different at the end of the summer than it was at the beginning of the summer. They were looking at things like filled and unfilled pauses, ums and ers, and tripping over individual words, whether that was exacerbated after the summer holiday. It turned out it wasn't, because many of our students, even if they don't use English at home, and even if they weren't spending the summer in an English-speaking country, despite that, they were still on social media, they were still in contact with their friends the whole time. So actually, they were still using English quite a lot, in a way, probably in a greater way than we'd expected. And so the students were surprised that the significance wasn't there that they were expecting to see, which as a school was really interesting for us to find out, because obviously if it transpired that there was a big gap in the fluency level at the end of the summer, then obviously we could have changed our teaching methods to accommodate that. This particular group of students in 2019 presented at the ECIS MLI conference. So these are the students at the top, and on the right-hand side, you can see the poster that they presented as part of their presentation. They also ran a workshop during the conference. Our next study, Project 3, how were new students socialised into language habits at ISL? This was quite a memorable project, because this was the one that was affected by COVID. We started it in person at the start of, towards the end of 2019. And we wanted to look at how this was the project we wanted to link with the school language policy, and we wanted to ascertain whether the transition of new students into the school in practice was aligned with that was written in the policy. But obviously March 2020 happened. We had just decided on a research question and a study design, which involved going into classes and doing lesson observations, and that had literally just been finalised, and then the following week the school went into lockdown. So the whole thing needed to be rethought. Consequently, I mean, we changed, like research everywhere, we had to change everything about the project. We had to change how we were meeting. We changed the pattern of our meetings and the length of our meetings. We, because of the ongoing uncertainty about how long the lockdown was going to happen and how long we were going to be working remotely, we couldn't rely on being able to be back in school to do lesson observations. And so we decided to move the whole thing to an online interview-based project instead. Also, because we made so many changes, the whole project took a lot longer, and it wasn't ever really finished to a satisfactory level in comparison to the others for obvious reasons. So that's just a little summary of some of the projects that we've done in the past. There will be time for questions at the end, but next I would like to introduce our students. So if you'd all like to come up and just quickly show your faces, and then you can all take turns. So I'd like to introduce, this is Asad.
Yep.
And Marina. And William. And Noah. Okay, so I think Asad is going to go first. So if the other three, if you want to go and sit back down, and Asad will make a start on the next part of the presentation.
Right. So
Okay.
on the language stories, for my language story, my mother tongue is Urdu, and the language I learned after that is English, and that's my most proficient language. I learned a little bit of Arabic when I lived in Saudi Arabia, but I've forgotten almost all of it by now. And I started learning French when I came here. And regarding English, English is my best language in terms of proficiency, and it was the language of instruction in all of my schools. And I'm developing proficiency in Urdu. I started taking tuition a few years ago, and I still retain a little bit of Arabic in a religious context, and I'm learning French at the school. And regarding my evaluation of that multilingualism and proficiency, partially because of something we've seen in Research Institute, which was a video by academic Colin Baker where he discusses some topics from his books. He mentions that it's normal for bilingual children and multilingual children to not have like equal proficiency in their multiple languages, which was sort of a bit eye-opening for me because I sort of expected that I was supposed to finish a language before starting a new one almost. And now I feel that it's achievable for me to finish learning or to gain proficiency in Urdu because that is the language that my family members speak, and I need to know that language to talk to them.
Noah, yes, perfect.
Hello. My language story begins in Switzerland, where I was born. In Switzerland, I spoke German in the nursery to other children and to the caretakers, whilst at home I spoke Danish and English. Danish was my most proficient language at this time. However, when I'm age 3, moved to Denmark, it continued being my most proficient language, and I began to speak it at the nursery and began to forget my German. When I was aged 7, I moved to Scotland, where I spoke English at school, but still spoke Danish and English at home. This established English as my academic language, and by this point, I had completely forgotten my German. Then I moved back to Denmark, where I went to an international school, my first, and continued speaking English at school and Danish and English at home. Then I moved to Bermuda, where I started learning Spanish and French in language acquisition and continued learning English at school. Then I moved to London, where I am now, where I began learning Danish on an academic level for the first time. And this was my second academic or international school, and continue speaking English at school. Learning academic Danish was quite difficult for me, however, as academic Danish is very difficult or very different from everyday Danish, as academic Danish encompasses historical, literary, and political topics. And this forced me to learn a lot of new vocabulary to help me with things like analysis. And I'm now taking my language story to Germany, where I hope to recuperate my German. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant.
So, I grew up in a lot of countries, and my language story started when I was born in Brussels. My parents are from two different backgrounds, so they decided to raise me from the beginning as bilingual, as I had a joint mother tongue of Italian from my dad and French from my mom. Immediately after that, I moved to Scotland at like 2 months old, where I suppose I had some English in my environment, but I didn't pick up on any of it, obviously, because I was only there until about 1 year old. I then moved to Romania, where then I started preschool. Um, at this point, my proficiency in French was slightly better than my proficiency in Italian, just because my mom was around more to talk to me in French more. And as I started in the French preschool in Romania, that only amplified my French skills. And I've also learned a bit of Romanian at that time. I knew a bit of Romanian at the time, just nothing major, just like a few words, maybe a few nursery rhymes. Yeah, and then I moved to Paris when I was 4 years old, which further amplified my French skills over my Italian skills. And that was when I completely lost all of my Romanian as soon as I stepped foot in France, which was slightly weird to looking back on it. I don't know how I did that so quickly, but alas, here we are. Then at 6 years old, I moved to England, where I was put in English school and therefore had to strengthen my English a lot. I was very passionate in speaking English. I was a very curious child, and I just wanted to have the experience of learning a new language and a new environment. And so I picked up on English very quickly, so much so that I had started losing my French when my mom started to stop speaking French to me in favor of learning English herself. Losing my mother tongue and my most proficient language up until that point was very weird to feel. Just having the feeling of losing the language you grew up with is a quite unique experience. But since I was so passionate in English, I practically didn't even think about that aspect at all. After another 2 years, I moved to Sweden, where I was put into international school, and so started speaking English way more than I did back in England itself. That was also when I started learning Swedish. I started learning it very, very slowly. And by the end of my 5-year tenure in Sweden, I only knew a bit of Swedish. I understand it pretty well, but I still can't speak a lot of the words from it. That was also when I started redoing French in school as part of my language acquisition course. It was quite weird just to see how much French I'd actually lost and how much French I'd actually retained. Just the few words that I would forget and the complicated words I would just have remembered from the back of my mind was very weird to experience. After that, I moved back to England, where here I am now, and started strengthening all of my languages, strengthening my Italian as part of this school's mother tongue program, strengthening my French by pursuing my language acquisition, and of course, strengthening my English as my most proficient language and my language of school. And yeah, that's where I am now. That's the end of the language story. Now on to Marina.
Hi, so my language story begins in Uzbekistan. So I was born in Uzbekistan, where my mother tongue was Russian, and I learned it through family and friends and social interactions. And then upon entering school at age of 6, Uzbek was a required language for me, despite the predominantly Russian-speaking environment. And learning Uzbek was not challenging for me at all, because from early childhood, I was exposed to it and I gained some basis and then built up my knowledge on that. And at age of 9, I started learning English with a tutor, and simultaneously my father and some other relatives introduced me to Belarusian. And learning Belarusian wasn't really difficult for me because it was quite similar to my mother tongue, and I really quickly picked up on the basis of it. And then when I was 13, me and my family moved to London, which is almost 3 years ago, where I started to improve my proficiency in English due to the dominance of the environment around me. And additionally, when I entered ISL, I started learning Spanish, which is the fourth language in my language story. And I have been studying for 2 years. And now I will move on to the project itself. And so moving on to the project itself, let's take a look at the poster we have created. So on the left side, you can see the timeline of our project. So we started with writing down our language stories. We moved on to choosing topics and research question. Then we started looking at literature we would like to use, discussed our methodology and participants and settings we would like to see in our projects. Then we also talked about ethics. We did survey pilots, fieldwork, and data collection. And finally, we moved on to data analysis. And based on our data analysis, we wrote conclusions, limitations, and recommendations. And as an output, we got this poster. On the right-hand side, you can see the research question of our project. Do international school students' multilingual social networks affect language learning anxiety? And also, you can see the aim of the project, why we chose this topic in our surveys that we used, findings, conclusions, limitations of the study, and the recommendations. So after creating and discussing our language stories, our group moved on to choosing the topic we would like to base our project on. And at the start, we came up with 23 questions connected to the topic of language. And for example, the questions were like, how do foreign languages affect our language, or does geography affect a language, and many others. And after we came up with original questions, we started to funnel them down into groups of interesting and not interesting, doable and not doable. And when we had a list of selected and discarded questions, we engaged in a discussion about this project with our academic mentor, which led us to creation of our social networks diagrams. So on the screen now, you can see an example of a social network diagrams. So it divides into 4 main parts. So one part is the family group, then the school group, after school clubs, and non-UK friends. And after we looked at each other's social diagrams, we understood that they play a significant role in the development of a language proficiency, and we saw a potential connection between multilingual social networks and language learning anxiety. And then this helped us to finally choose the research question: do international school students' multilingual social networks affect language learning anxiety? And now I'm going to pass on to William, who's going to talk about literature.
So, just to let you guys know, all the literature will be found in the Padlets at the end. So if you want to inquire more about any of the pieces of literature that we used, you can do so at the end. And so I just want to emphasize, following linguistic research, and conducting this kind of linguistic research and delving into many kinds of linguistic articles is really one of a kind of experience for us as secondary school students, and is usually reserved for more advanced educational facilities such as universities and master's degrees and all that. And moving on to the first piece of literature that we used is the book you see on the right, in Morris Carter's book on bilingualism in international schools. This book was our introduction to the concept of language stories, which you have just heard. And this provided context and examples of language stories and how people conduct language stories and people's language stories in other international schools, which then led us to create our own language stories, which you have just heard, which was the first step into beginning our project and to completing this project. And the second piece of literature is an article on social networks by the University of Gothenburg, in which they discuss language proficiency in bilingual students among social groups. They did this by conducting surveys on the language proficiency of 3 language groups within students in this Swedish school, usually their home language or mother tongue language, their English proficiency level, and their Swedish proficiency level. This was quite interesting to us as it provided us information on how social groups can dilute language use and how language use can variate between social groups, and how that reflects among the students' language use themselves. And that was quite interesting to see in this context, as we have a lot of experience using multiple languages for multiple social groups in our international school as well. And the third piece of literature that we use is the Language Anxiety and Achievement Scale review that introduced us to the concept of language anxiety. The definition that article was using did not take into account the concept of mother tongue, which was quite important to us, as that is a subject that everyone who has a home language other than English in our school has to take. And therefore, we needed to alter the definition of language learning anxiety to fit our concept of language learning and how our school works. And then we identified 3 different language groups to do this by, which is English language use, mother tongue language use or home language use, and language acquisition language use, which is either French, Spanish, or Chinese. And the last piece of literature that we used is the sample surveys. We use the Foreign Language Classroom Anxiety Scale as the basis for our final survey because of how well it fits within the school and how we think about the school and how we think about learning languages in the school. And it also makes the study original as we took this survey as the basis for our survey, in which we altered some of the questions and altered the structure of the survey to fit within 3 language groups and fit within how we learn languages as students in the school. And now we'll pass it on to Assad, who will be talking about survey data. Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to be picking up from where William left off and discussing the survey design. And as William mentioned, the key piece of literature here was the Foreign Language Classroom Anxiety Scale, which ended up forming the backbone of our survey. We did modify it to fit the demographics that William mentioned, which were the 3 language classes, that being English language and literature, language acquisition, and home language. And from there, we had a participant recruitment criteria because we only needed students who went to all 3 of those groups, particularly so we could compare results between groups. That's one example of what we could do with that data. And so we set out, after we were done designing our survey, we set out to pilot it in ISL's sister school, ISL Qatar. But before we could pilot, we had to look at the ethical implications of the survey. And to do that, we had to send out an information and consent form. The key components of that were that the students would be anonymized and that we would only receive them through ID numbers. We could not know their names or personal details like email addresses or any contact details. And another key part of the consent form was the information that the participants would get to know, which was that the survey is voluntary and that students have the right to withdraw at any time. They don't have to give us a reason for having their answers pulled from the survey. They will also know that they will be anonymized. And so then we set out to pilot in ISL Qatar. And the reasoning behind that was it would allow us to see if there were any errors in our question, if there were any issues with our language or wording, and to see how participants respond and if they're misled. And now I'm going to go back to William, and he's going to cover fieldwork.
So now I will be covering data collection and fieldwork. So originally we had 2 settings for our study design, which was the ISL London campus and our affiliated school, ISL Qatar campus. There were 82 students from the ISL London campus that fit our criteria, which was having mother tongue, language acquisition, and English, and taking all 3 subjects. And the sample size from the ISL Qatar campus was undisclosed. The survey was distributed in the following ways. In ISL London, the research facilitators were in charge of having student data as per our ethics and safeguarding guidelines, and therefore they could send the link to our survey via email to the students that fit our criteria. In ISL Qatar, the research facilitators in that research institute were responsible for sending the link to their criteria fitting students, which is also undisclosed to us. All in all, we received 17 responses, which were all from ISL London, with that meaning that we had a 20% response rate, which is a fairly common response rate for this type of survey. And but for some reasons that could have been foreseen for this response rate, and what we could have done more to increase the response rate was that we could have motivated students more, just in terms of pushing this survey to the school and marketing it around the school. We could have done more to motivate the students to fill out this survey, and maybe we'd not encourage it enough, which was fault in our doing. And the second reason was specifically for ISL Qatar. We did not take into consideration that Ramadan fell on the time period in which we launched our survey, which meant that the students from ISL Qatar were not on campus for those weeks, and therefore could not have finished the survey, or would have to do so in their own free time, which was not very realistic. And yeah, that's it for data collection. And now we have Noah with data analysis.
Hello. Despite only receiving 17 responses, due to the length of our survey, the spreadsheet we obtained was quite extensive. Specifically, the 23 questions, of which many were multiple choice or had sub-questions, allowed for the creation of a very extensive spreadsheet. To begin with, when analyzing the data, we got a large spreadsheet, which we had to code so that we could put it into or use statistical analysis techniques. The data was then run through SPSS by our academic mentor to generate statistical data. However, upon obtaining the statistical data, we did discover some issues. The small number of responses made it difficult to establish statistical significance, and the large number of questions provided us with too much data and too many variables. Then, furthermore, in terms of our findings, there were no big surprises, with no significant link being made between international students, multilingual social networks, and their language learning anxiety in all three language groups. We also did find, however, that there was more anxiety in language acquisition and mother tongue, where students were the most comfortable in English, and the rating of language learning anxiety was generally low across all three languages. We also discovered that there are no correlations between the size of someone's social network and their language learning anxiety in mother tongue, language acquisition, and English. The size of social network and self-reported proficiency in mother tongue, language acquisition, and English, and the grade level and self-reported proficiency in all three language subjects. But however, most interestingly of all, we discovered that speaking with more people in mother tongue did not affect one's self-reported proficiency in either English or language acquisition. This is very interesting, as it's a bit counterintuitive, as we expected that in order for someone to have to speak with more people in their mother tongue, it would mean that they would be less proficient in either English or language acquisition. Okay. And now, moving on to the reasons we joined, we have Marina.
So, personally, from my experience, I decided to join Research Institute because I thought it would be a unique experience that would be really useful for me at that point of time, as well as in the future. For example, it would look really well on my university application. And I also joined Research Institute because it would help me to improve my research and some analytical skills. And I stayed in the Research Institute because the project itself was really interesting, and I was so passionate to get the results and analyze them by the end to get to some outcome from this project. And in addition, the Research Institute really met my expectations, and I saw improvements in my research skills, communication, group working, and analytical skills. And now moving on to Noah with reflections.
To reflect, we learned many things throughout this process, which are amongst that research takes time, and we gained some understanding of the process. We also learned a lot about data, such as quantitative and qualitative data. And we also learned about how to make a research question, the steps in the research process, such as data collection, analysis, etc. We also learned about the research methodology, the ethics in research, communicating our findings. And we also, furthermore, even learned about like making a survey about linguistics, which was very educational and a great opportunity to use our existing knowledge and to conduct advanced academic research. And as my final comment, we were all very happy to be able to partake in this project as we learned a lot and are proud of our results. Thank you.
Okay, so we've actually cut down the end bit because, strangely, even though we've done this exact presentation before, this time it seems to have taken longer. So, but we wanted to allow time for any questions that anybody has. So if anybody's got any questions, we'd be really happy to take them now.
Hi guys, I'm
Hi.
Miss Karina. I'm Miss Karina from Panama City, Panama. I just wanted to tell you, gracias, thank you. Your dedication to multilingualism was truly inspiring. And as an educator, I am deeply motivated with your passion and commitment. You guys are the leaders of tomorrow. I can see that. And I just wanted to tell you again, thank you. You were very inspiring. You gave me a lot of idea to put in practice with my students in Boston School in Panama. And keep being, you are such amazing, not only researchers, but also ambassadors. So you should be very proud of yourself. Thank you. Gracias.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Claire, do you mind if I jump in and ask a question?
Please do.
You had mentioned the language policy earlier, and that it's important that students know that the language policy exists. And I'm curious, the question is for the students. During this process, when you were creating the questions that you would ask in your survey, right? Did you ever look at your language policy, and did that guide your process at all? Or when you were reflecting on your results, did you think about how that policy looked, or can you?
Oh, actually, I mean, the project where we looked at the language policy was actually a different project to the one that
sorry.
that was actually the project that we were looking at during COVID. It was the project before the one that these guys did. Although I think we did introduce the language policy to you, didn't we?
we did.
I'm talking about our social networks and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was included, but it wasn't a big part of this particular project.
Thank you. Sorry.
That's okay.
I'll ask another question then. We do this at our school too, not this type of thing, that we give students activities that we know can strengthen their university applications, right? And often we have students who join activities because of that reason, right? If you were to redo the whole thing over again, would you do it just because you enjoyed doing it? Or is it just for the university application in hindsight?
Well, I would do it because I enjoyed doing it, certainly because I learned a lot about languages and how they work, and I got to attend an ECIS conference, which was very enlightening. Definitely.
Definitely.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I mean, Asad has actually rejoined again, haven't you?
Yeah,
So even though the project that we're presenting on today was one that we finished at the end of the last academic year, Asad has actually been with us again this year on the next project that we've been working on. So he came back.
Gosh, I really love that. Does anybody else have any questions? Vivian.
On, let me get myself organized with the mute and unmute. Did you students, did you go into any organized classes and ask, like, you know, work with a teacher to kind of gather more student participation? Or did you manage to use an informal network to encourage your classmates to help you compile this data?
We went into organized classes.
Didn't we primarily just use emails?
Yeah.
We weren't physically in person with our participants
Yeah.
for this project.
Yeah.
We definitely encourage our peers informally, like you said, just like spreading around the word of this survey,
Yeah,
just if they were interested.
and we created the posters that we hang around the school, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we did. Yeah. Yeah, so there was a lot of publicity around it, but obviously because of the ethical considerations of the students themselves not knowing who their participants were, because we had to keep that level of anonymity. It's a really complicated situation actually when you're researching, when you're conducting a piece of research and your participants are your peer group. It adds an additional level of sort of ethical responsibility to your participants. So we sort of kept the line fairly strict in terms of the researchers knew that participants were providing information, but they didn't know who the participants were. So they were able to put posters up, and they were able to, you know, go into a class and say, if you've received an email, please complete the survey. But they didn't actually know who the students were that they were targeting. So all of that came through me, because I was the one that held all the student data that established whether each individual student was met all of our criteria to be a participant in the project. So it sort of it gave that distance between the researcher and the participant that under normal circumstances they would have if they didn't know their participants.
So you've really formalized the research, certainly above a level of any kind of data collection that I've seen in my own school. Did you have, but it must have taken some time to build an atmosphere of this is really how research is conducted. So did you have a long lead time before you could start these wonderful projects?
I mean, I think every project, part of the building up of the study design with the academic mentor is a discussion about the ethics and confidentiality and anonymity and all of the GDPR, all of the things that we need to consider as researchers. And we actually, the information sheet and consent form that we use is one that is used in a university. So we took one from a university years ago, and we've continued to use the same one, and we just adapt it every time. But building, we build all of the conversations about ethics, I mean, right through the project. So it starts at the very beginning of the project, where we start discussing what it is ethical to do and what it's not ethical to do. But that becomes really important as in the study design section of the work, where all of the ethical considerations are thrashed out at that point. And we ensure then that the information sheet and consent form that we provide to our participants includes everything that the participant needs to know. And at that point, the students who are researching are also very aware of the boundaries and limitations that they're working within.
So you also have the additional benefit of kind of spreading, even unconsciously, a culture of academic integrity.
Yes,
which is so
hope,
vital.
There's the hope that the student participants that take part in our work, they're obviously, they become aware of things like information sheets, consent forms, that sort of thing. They become aware of those things that they wouldn't under normal circumstances be aware of at this stage.
I have to tell you, you've given me some nice potential ideas. I'm trying to develop a bank of academic integrity or ethical critical thinking scenarios just to introduce before research projects when I can. And if it's part of an ongoing discussion, I think it's more easily and readily absorbed. So I have to thank you, Claire, and your wonderful students. You've really given me some real inspiration for some very practical ideas I could introduce to my particular school population here.
Good. Thank you.
Now, does anybody else have any other questions? No? All right, I would like to echo Vivian's sentiments as well. Thank you so much for sharing all these incredible experiences. I also have, I'm walking away with just all of these ideas that I want to go and implement at my own school and think about the impact that our language stories have on us and our students and how we can integrate that into research and academic integrity. This has really been amazing and really powerful. So thank you, students, for sharing your experience. And thank you, Claire, for really facilitating their love of research. I think it's
It's
really
a pleasure. It's been a great experience to work with them, and I think they've done themselves proud. I just want to just quickly say that on the screen at the moment there's the QR code to the Padlet with all of the resources and work that I referred to earlier. This obviously is in the slides with the link, and if anybody is interested in finding out any more about the research, or even about maybe running a similar project in your school, this is the place to do that. So again, you can go to the slides and click on the link there, and I can pass on some more information to you all.
Okay, gosh, thank you so much. Now, before everybody goes, the committee would love to hear your feedback about the webinar. Please complete the feedback form. I've just posted the link in the chat. This will help us not only improve our webinars, but keep giving you these type of great events and services that you enjoy that will help like support and grow your daily practices at your school. I know if you're like me, I'm walking away like really inspired, and I hope you feel the same way. Also, ECIS is looking for additional webinar proposals, so please consider applying for those. That link is also shared in the chat. That's it for today, and thank you so much for attending. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.